I would probably take an average 1-2 grinder playing his A game over an average 25-50 grinder playing his C game any day.
You're listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast. Each week, you'll get to peek inside the greatest minds in the game and discover what makes them successful.
Mental toughness separates those that can't handle the stress.
If you're going to treat it like an amateur, you're probably going to have amateur results.
Now here's your host, Elliot Rowe.
Hey, Elliot Rowe here. I'm very excited to announce that for the next few episodes, Stephen Baker will be guest hosting the show. Stephen has experience both as a professional poker player, strategic coach, and now a member of my mindset performance coaching world. I can confidently say that Stephen's one of the world's leading experts in poker mindset and performance, and I'm really excited to hear the conversations he has with some fantastic guests. And with that, here's Stephen.
Welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast. My name's Stephen Baker, and my guest on today's podcast is Mike Wasserman. Mike has won over $7.5 million in online and live MTTs. He's won the Sunday Million, the GG Global Millions, and he's won big live tournaments as well. He's also produced some excellent MTT courses, and in today's podcast, he'll share with us all he's learned about poker, about the mental game from all of those years in poker. So I look forward to sharing this podcast with you and all of the takeaways that Mike is going to share with us. Well, Mike, firstly, thank you very much for joining me and everybody else on the Mindset Advantage podcast. You're very well known to me as somebody who's consumed your courses and also has been playing poker long enough to remember you as ranking number one on Pocket Fives, winning the Sunday Million. But I'd like to give you a chance to just introduce yourself. Just tell us a little bit about your backstory. When you started in poker, how it came about. And then I'd like to just discuss really the journey. But firstly, when did you first get into poker?
It started with sports early on. And then it kind of, I played baseball my whole life growing up. I ended up I went to a junior college and tried out for their team and quickly realized when I wasn't around any of my friends that I wasn't ready and willing to do what it took. And although I, at the time, couldn't imagine my life without baseball, I ended up just cutting the cord and just saying, you know what, I'm not willing to get up at 5 a.m. and work out before school. This is a whole different thing than playing in high school with your friends and being on varsity or JV or whatever. So it started with baseball and basketball. I've always been competitive, and then it moved to video games. And I think that's kind of where that was probably the link between poker and sports for me. Sports is obviously, poker is I never even really thought about that. It's like a hybrid in a way of the visceral experience of playing competitive sports. And then the digital realm that I spend a lot of time in, as you can see the big monitor behind me. Yeah. So I graduated from Cal State Northridge in California with a degree in communications. Then I went to audio engineering school, took out a loan for my mom got me a loan for $13K or something at the time. And I ended up paying it off playing 2-5 and 1-3 cash. And I think that was the first time, even though I had played prior to that, that was the first time where I realized there's something here. And in 2008, end of 2008, I quit my job at Cheesecake Factory. And I was a waiter. I was probably not. Erica and I, my longtime partner, we kind of laugh at how bad I must have been at being a waiter, having people snap at me, and the amount of anyway, I don't want to get into it, but I just maybe don't have the best personality for it. I gave 2 weeks notice, and I had like $3,000 in my pocket, $3,500, and I had no plan. I just quit. And I was like, I just can't do this anymore. It was too corporate. They were asking too much. And I was an avid poker player at the time. Definitely was not professional, especially looking back. But at the time, I thought I was pretty good. And I went and played a $500 deep stack at the Bike in LA. And I ended up making the final table and chopping 10-handed. And I got like third place money. During that tournament, I kept the $3,000 that I had to my name in my pocket. So I knew, like, if I bust, I'm not broke. I still got this $3,000, which is so funny to me now. It's just horrible bankroll management. But it did work out. Within 1 year of that score, this was like $25,000. I was going to Vegas. I was playing blackjack, playing cash games, playing tournaments, whatever. Lost everything except for $1,000. Had to move back home. So I was effectively broke. This is the story of going broke. For me, it was $25,000. For others, it was more or less. And I decided, it's funny, I have a link to the article about this story. I wrote this out for advanced poker training.
It's a good read, and it's instructive to show how tough life can be on the way up to where you got to. But yeah, do carry on, because it's a great story.
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of expedite it since we're a little bit limited on time, but I moved back home. I applied for hosting jobs, just to host at a restaurant. It was like $7 an hour or something at the time. It was just such a hit to the ego. And I was like, well, I got to do it, So I apply for jobs. I come back home. This is pre-Black Friday. And I have $1.75. I just $1.75. Maybe it was $1.76 in my PokerStars account. Opened up Omaha heads up for $1, and I won it. And then I went on to play a couple more of them, and kept, overall won a high percentage of them. Then I, started some to mix in some like $3 rebuy satellites. Won some Sunday Million seats. That was huge, like a 3 rebuy satty to the Sunday Million. And I won like 2 of them. And then I had $500 in my account. I'm like, oh, like I ran this dollar all the way up to like a couple hundred. And then I ended up, I can't remember I think I ran it up to about $1,000 in my Stars account. I cashed it out, put $50 on Cake Poker, ran that up to $5,000, cashed it out. And at that time, that was a really big sweat for me. I waited for about 3 weeks. I had no money. I needed the 1,000 that I won on Stars. And I waited for 3 weeks, and I played play money. No joke. I was just playing play money just because I wanted to play. And finally the check, and I didn't know if the check was going to come, right? Because you get a check and it's like Bill's Golf Ball Emporium. And you're like, what is this company? Like, where's this check come from? But it came through, it cleared. And then I put a little bit more money back on Stars and immediately won the 20 cubed for like $10,000. And I just had a bankroll again. And since then, it's like no chance. There was like no chance I was going broke after that. Like I was like, I'm not going through this again. And so it's interesting now, having described it that way, I realized that a lot of my, I don't want to say success, but whatever it is, that my ability to have longevity in the game is fueled by understanding what the alternative is. And the alternative is to go back and to clock in. The alternative is to work for somebody else. And that's actually like the driving force for me is I'm not going back. Like, I'm not going back. If I go back to working for someone else, I would do it for free. Like, it's going to be because I choose to do it. I want to be there. I want to learn, and it's for a greater purpose. It's not even a possibility. So anytime that, you know what, I'll let you ask some questions, interject here, because this is going to tie into some future questions, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think what you say is very, very true. I think, it's interesting. I often look back on university and I think I would have appreciated it more if I'd worked for 2 or 3 years and then gone to university. I didn't realize how amazing it was just being able to do what you want to do. And I think once you get a job and you have to work and you have to graft, you've got a boss, then you really understand what it's like. And yeah, I think I appreciated my time. I appreciate my time now with the freedom I have. And I appreciated the time I had in professional poker because I'd had a job which was a 9 till 5 job. And you suddenly realize the freedom that you've got as a poker player. Of course, you have to work hard. And you've also described how difficult it can be. I mean, apart from those early days where, you're scrabbling around for the money. I mean, again, I know that you had a significant downswing at one point, didn't you? I mean, you weren't going bust in terms of your overall life bankroll, but was it around 2013, 2014, you had a downswing, and some people don't come back out of those, but you did. Tell me a little bit about that.
I was backed at the time. So the downswing was it wasn't just my money. I was actually very blessed that when Black Friday happened, my backers money, I had just put my backers money into my accounts and taken all 30K that I had to my name out. And then Black Friday happened. So my whole household, everyone had to go home and go to their respective states. I was living in a house with a bunch of poker players in Vegas. And it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me, but that's a little bit besides the point. I'm all over the place, I know. But so the downswing was not so much of I didn't feel it financially because I had money in the bank now. Because, from 2011 to 2013, I made some pretty good money pretty consistently online. I was working with my mentor and coach and making so much progress in my game, and the games were softer and I was just able to just print. And when this downswing happened, it was the first time where I really realized it's not that easy all the time, and I see students there's one thing I see that I think is such a great insight into how people view things. And it was one of the guys that I learned from originally. He used to play sit and goes, and he would make consistent money every month. Let's say $10,000 a month, high volume, high ROI, crushing the games. And he would say, I'm thinking about living expenses and where I want to live, but I realized that when I'm making 10K a month, expenses aren't going to be a problem. And I was just thinking buddy, that's not how life works. You can't just always print. It's not always going to be like that. And I see this even with people that I have a friend that works in the video games, and he's making $250,000 a year, or whatever the number is. It's a high number. And he doesn't save any money. He doesn't invest any money. He just kind of takes for granted that that's going to be the case all the time. And I always say to my other friend who's an accountant is I can't believe that he thinks that this is just it's always going to be. What if the company lays him off and he has a $10,000 a month mortgage because he just bought $1 million house? You can't. I don't think you can live your life that way. I can't live my life that way. So I'm always about mitigating risk. I'm fairly risk averse for the profession that I'm in. I like keeping my living expenses low. So the downswing was more of a mental thing for me than it was like a financial thing. So I couldn't get over the fact that what it ultimately came down to was uncertainty. And I hired Alex Fitzgerald to tactically coach me. And I had friends at the time that were like, why are you going to him? You're better than him. There's like so much ego, so much ego in poker. And I'm like, this guy's been around for a long time. There's things he can teach me. And like, even just a line check, of course. Like, I'm going to go to Alex. Yeah. And I hired Jared Tendler. And I just bit the bullet, and just whatever his hourly was, I'm like, I don't care, fix my head. And he literally, I feel like he got into my brain, and I was like, I wish there was a visual of this. I feel like my brain was sideways, and he did this with it so I could see straight again. And I was like, oh, okay. I can actually enjoy myself again. I can start at 0 at the beginning of every session. I can make sure I'm doing things away from the table that this is before solvers. So it's a real headache to try and to actually study, but review hands and stay sharp and reconnect with like what I enjoyed about poker, and reconnect with my passion for like being competitive and the insecurity that drives that. So it was actually like, it was an unbelievable experience. So within 5 hours of sessions, we did 10 hours. Within 5 hours, he had completely transformed the way that I was perceiving things. He dug into my relationship with uncertainty. Like I realized, I don't care when the downswing, how long the downswing is. I need to know for sure that it's going to end. And then I realized as I said that statement that there were like some false parts of it that I was trying to convince. It's therapy. That's what it is. It's therapy.
Yeah.
And we all need it, and we can all benefit from it.
Absolutely.
And I'm so grateful for it, because since then I go to a therapist, and, on and off, I've been going to therapy for a long time. I still do mental game coaching. I'm working with Dan Heskett right now. Dan is amazing. I've worked with my friend Evan on some stuff. He's more holistic about things, but man, it's the best thing I've ever done. And I recommend it for absolutely everybody. Pay whatever the cost is.
Yeah.
That's it.
I mean, my own personal experience, and, I started working with Elliot when I was in professional poker, Elliot Rowe, and I still have a performance coach, even though I'm no longer in professional poker. I still think it's beneficial. It's just, and the truth of the matter is, you can, I'm now a performance coach, but it's the old thing of you can't read the label if you're inside the jar. You need somebody else to spot what your patterns are. And somebody else, my performance coach, will say to me, have you thought of this? And it's remarkable how often, holding my hand up, I'll say, no, I hadn't. I hadn't thought of it that way. And that's what it's about. So I can only endorse what you say on that. Tell me about any challenges now. I mean, do you have any mental game? I mean, obviously, you moved beyond that period of the downswing. And by the sounds of it, you did exactly what you hoped to do in terms of you don't just come out the downswing, you actually come out of it better. That challenge has actually strengthened you, perhaps mentally, technically. But what about now? Are there any challenges now in terms of your mental game?
I think understanding what's in store for you at the beginning of each session is super key. MTTs are, unless you've put in volume at MTTs, you really can't understand what it's like. And I can't stress this enough. People think that they know what it's like to play tournaments or play a lot of tournaments, but when you're playing, 10,000 tournaments a year, like minimum, you end up, if you can't detach and become an observer that's with equanimity of, oh, that happened. Like all in on the turn with top set and they river a higher set. Like this type of thing. Then when you're first starting, you can't believe how bad that beat is. The way that you start to look at that as you put in more volume is like, oh, the money goes in for both of us. So, you know, he hit his king, you know, he had pocket kings. Okay, that's fine. Or you have a boat and they have quads. You're like, okay, like sometimes they have quads. It's not very often, but you know, it's one of the outcomes. And you start to view things in a less emotional manner, in a more like observant way, where that's just one of the possibilities, you know. And if you can really, it doesn't matter how likely it is. It's just that you know that it is a possibility. Now, when these things start to stack up and you start to deal with like accumulated tilt, which was the first thing that I had to deal with, that's what a downswing is. It's the accumulation of just over and over and over, right? The only thing that will resolve whatever the issue is that you have in your life or in your poker game, the only way that you will resolve it is to take accountability. Understand why it's your fault, how it's your fault, and what you can do about it. And if you can just focus on accountability, just that word, accountability, then you can start to take action. All right, how did I get here? Like when, you know, I'm stuck 100K right now, like, but this is par for the course for me, you know, even online with an ABI of 100, like, yeah, I'm stuck, you know, 80K or something at the moment.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, last night I finished my session off by playing my heart out to win a tournament that was 1K up top. And then another tournament that was a mystery bounty on Ignition that was like, you know, it was like 4,300 up top plus bounties or something. I ended up finishing a session where I was stuck the whole session. And I ended up winning 8,500 at the end of the session and just put me up, you know, 6,500 for the day or something. And that, I think, is another key to MTTs and to the mental side of things, is like having that innate drive or being able to connect with that drive of like not giving up.
Absolutely.
Going hard until the very end. If it means winning your last, if it's a $2 turbo and it's like 600 up top, you know, and you're in for 2K for the day, then you know, you still play that $2 turbo like it is life or death almost.
This, I think we've just hit on one of the most important soft skills of the really good poker player, and particularly the MTT player, because, you know, the amount of clients who I've had who, particularly saying big series, so it could be a big online series like W Coop, or it could be big live series like the World Series. They can get very low because they're bricking tournament after tournament after tournament. But the reality is, it may be the last one in the whole sequence, which is the winner, and it makes all the others feel irrelevant. But you can't know that. You've got to find that belief, and you've got to find that equanimity within yourself to get there and play your best in that last tournament. And by the way, even if it's not the last tournament of that series, your career is longer than the series anyway.
Always zooming out. Always.
Yeah.
So key. I have two insights to what you just said.
Yeah.
When you're downswinging, whether it's a short-term downswing, like you're playing scoop and the first week goes bad, like, or it's a long-term downswing, whatever it is, I think it's extremely important to mix, like if you're feeling any doubt, immediately remove your highest buy-in and replace it with your lowest buy-in and a smaller field. So where you may have, you wanted to play the 1K or whatever, and instead of firing that 1K because you're already second guessing yourself, the week has gone poorly during scoop or whatever it is, and playing a $50 like 500 cap. Like I used to always mix those into my schedule. And these, doing those courses with Brian Paris, I saw that he does the same thing, where there's an understanding that like you have to go back to basics. You have to go back to the tournaments where you have the biggest edge and you're going to win more frequently. And when you start replacing your highest buy-ins with lower buy-ins and smaller fields, what ends up happening is basically you're adding some sit and goes into your schedule. And what you do is you end up winning them more frequently, right? So you go through all the stages, you go through the accumulation, and you remember what it's like. Sometimes it feels like you're never going to win again. But I promise, if you go back and you play smaller fields, you only have to win a couple of flips, and then you're like chip leading with 3 left. Whatever it may be, going through that process of accumulating all the chips, playing the bubble, playing the final table, whatever the stack size is. There's many iterations. You can come in 9 of 9, or you can come in 1 of 9, and you can finish in any of those places. But going through the reps and getting the reps of like, oh yeah, this is all right. So I got 3rd in this one, but this is where I messed up. I had to like remind myself of that. I can't fold the 7s in that spot. I have to 4-bet shove them. Oh, all right. Yeah. And then it's fresh in your mind. You come back and you find yourself in that spot in a $500 MTT, and you're like, oh yeah, this is what it takes.
I mean, this is interesting as well, that 2 guys like you and Brian, who have been around but the common bond is longevity at a high level. You've been there for years, and another really important soft skill is and I think it does take humility to say, do you know what? I'm going to reduce my buy-in here, and circle the wagons and rebuild. Whereas I think some players are like, right, hell, I'm going to fight and they'd see it as a positive. And I understand why they'd frame it as, I'm going to double down here. I'm going to play the higher buy-in. But actually it's quite often a desperate attempt to recoup. Whereas what your
previous
approach
losses
is and what Brian's is no, I'm playing the long game. Let's just rebuild and be prepared to be patient. Rebuild myself mentally, rebuild myself technically, and rebuild sometimes, reduce that makeup bit by bit. But eventually it takes you back to the level you were, and then hopefully you push beyond. But I think that again is another skill which is evident in the experienced pro who has the longevity.
Yeah, as you're describing that, it's making me realize that like, I'm on this journey right now of counting my calories and like losing some weight. I had an appendectomy done, and then I was not super mobile or working out for a month. I let that turn into like snowball into a bunch of bad habits and gaining a bunch of weight over the next year. And now I'm trying to like unwind this, and I'm taking in some content about like, weight training and just health, diet, exercise, these types of things. And one of the things that was hard for me to accept is like, let's just do push-ups as an example. Right now you can do 5 push-ups or 10 push-ups, whatever it is. Your goal is to do 20 push-ups. But like, you're always in order to grow, you always have to be like on that threshold of what your maximum is. Right. Yeah. So effectively you will be able to do more and more, but it doesn't get easier. It never really gets easier. And that was hard for me to accept. It was like, it's like doing core exercises. That is probably the best example for me, where I hate it, right? But then I've started reminding myself, who wants to do this? Nobody wants to do this. Who's doing it right now? You, motherfucker, you're doing it. Nobody else is willing to do this, and you're doing it right now. You know, it's like David Goggins gets in my head. And so I kind of started to take pride in it. So I'll go downstairs, and I just, half of my garage is now my little gym, and I'm starting to add things to it. And it's understanding that it never gets easy, but you just develop stronger tools to deal with these things, and you have a deeper understanding of what is to come, and the fact that it's all part of the process. And there's a peace of mind that comes with the swings, the ups and downs of especially tournament poker. That you can kind of, if you stop fighting it, you can start to accept it. And when you accept it, it's just, okay, you start to view things a little bit more objectively. And it's really hard to be objective when you're swinging hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands or thousands, whatever it may be, whatever the significant number is to you. Like the ability to have equanimity, the ability to zoom out and say, okay, unemotionally, this is the situation, whether it's good or it's bad, what's the best decision that we can make moving forward so that, I can have continued success, or I can turn this boat around. And so for me, that's always been make sure that I find a coach or have a coach that I can reach out to, make sure I have peers that I can ask questions to and run hands by that I respect. And that, I know have a deep knowledge, and then I have to have a mental game coach at all times, all times. Just because I know this stuff doesn't mean it's easy to apply. It's very hard to apply. Moving down in stakes, cutting out your 1K when you're stuck 100K and playing a $50 MTT instead, it's not easy to do. But I've learned that it's what's required in order to succeed. And not succeeding is not an option for me. So this is what I have to do now. So I'm going to do it. That's the way that I look at it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting the analogy you drew between fitness training and poker, and particularly MTTs. I mean, for example, at the start of this year, I had a couple of injuries. I do weight training and other training as well. And, all of a sudden I put on some weight and I didn't want to be there. It's like you do a lot of work to get yourself to what you think is a pretty good weight, pretty good shape. And all of a sudden you have to accept the reality that, sorry, you've just been hit by a couple of blows, just the way you can be in poker for a while. You can go on a bad run. And I do think poker is good if you learn the lessons as teaching you about how to be resilient, and just accept, it doesn't matter. You just rebuild, you just go again. And maybe in the course of all of that, you actually learn how to go better again, better than before. You actually learn something in those bad moments. I learned with the injuries that I'm not going to do deadlifts anymore.
You're not 25.
Yeah, exactly. That part of my back is no longer what it was. But in poker, I think even if in large measure or in significant measure, your downswing may be the result of variance, bad card distribution. The truth is you almost always find something you can improve mentally and technically if you look during a downswing. Of course, ideally, you're looking all the time, aren't you? You're looking when you're running well as well. But I do think it really does teach you a very valuable lesson in resilience to what life throws at you.
Yeah, ultimately, I feel like tournament poker specifically is maybe one of the most powerful tools that life can offer to make you process oriented rather than results oriented. So it's in a way, it's almost like if you're consistent with your process, and it's the positive process of whatever your routine is, of constantly getting better, taking introspective look and looking at your game, looking at yourself, looking at your game, making sure that you're studying, you're mindful going into the sessions, you're mindful of the mistakes you're making, and you're always improving, and you're consistently working at that. However, with a study group, by yourself, whatever it is, with a coach, if you're doing all those things, you don't really have to worry you don't have to question whether it's variance, whether it's running bad or playing bad, because you're always cutting out the bad play. And so eventually, like, things are just going to end up turning around for you. I know it's hard for it to feel like that when you're in a downswing, but eventually it's just, if you're studying a lot and getting better all the time, like, look at these there's so many examples of this in the poker world, like, especially from like Europe specifically, like these Austrians and Germans and Russians that are just such good players. And they're like still in their 20s or maybe in their late 20s now, that have just found good mentorship and have just worked their asses off, and they've earned it. Right before this pod, I went and did I went to cold plunge place, and I did the cold plunge. So I thought that was a really good analogy for what we were talking about earlier. Like, when I go and do a cold plunge, when I first did it, I couldn't. I put my foot in and I was like, no way. I'm not doing this. I took my foot out. My body was like, that's not happening. And then, I came back another time. I tried again. And I put, like, I sat in it for like 10 seconds and I was like, no way, I'm not doing this. My body was like, you're not doing this. So then I came back and I said, will you sit with me? The guy that works there, who's become a friend of mine now. And I was like, will you just sit with me and like talk me through this? Because I know I can do this, but like, I just have to get out. Like, that feeling of like, I have to get out. And he goes, sure. So he sits with me and he kind of talked me through it. And I realized, like, I did like 90 seconds, which is a kind of like a marker with cold plunging. So there's like 90 for me, there's 90 seconds and there's 3 minutes. There's the initial shock where you get in and your body's like, what is going on? You need to get out of here immediately. And then once you get over that, then you start to feel the pain in the legs and the toes and all that stuff. And then it slowly dissipates over time, the pain. And you start to become very like Zen, and it almost becomes, after about 3 minutes, it almost feels like it's warm because you're numb. And to this day, now that I've, done it maybe 50 times, and now I'm starting to try, I bought gloves so I can put my hands under, and I want to have exposure to like everything up to my neck. I got in there today and I had to psych myself up. Like, I had to take deep breaths, like I'm Wim Hofing it, trying to get myself, mentally ready to get in that water. It's warm in the room. Why would I go out of this warm room into this cold water and then sit there? But I know all the benefits. I believe that it's good for me. I believe it creates discipline and it creates mental fortitude. I believe in all the positive things of it, what it does for metabolism and energy levels and oxytocin and all this stuff. So when I sit, I have to get into the mindset of, I know what's about to happen. That's okay. we're going to do it anyway. And it's going to suck. It's going to suck. I'm not going to get in and it's going to feel warm. It's going to feel really cold and I'm going to want to get out, but I'm not going to get out. I'm just going to sit there. And so I have to like have this talk with myself. And then I start looking at the watch and I'm like, wow, it's been a minute. I'm procrastinating. Like, I really don't want to get in this water. And as soon as I start going through that kind of talk, I'm like, okay, it's time to go. Like the longer I wait, the more I'm putting this off. Like I'm going to do it anyway. So let's get in the water and let's do it. And I sit and I just do it. And then, you know, I listen to 2 songs. It's like 8 to 10 minutes long and I'm done. And then I get out and like, I guess the analogy here is it's the process of doing the cold plunge. It's like, I have to remind myself, I have to know going in what's going to happen. What are does that make sense? I'm not shocked, or I am shocked, but I know the shock is coming. So you get that initial shock and you're like, okay, that's what this is. And having somebody talk me through that at the beginning was so powerful. I would probably never been able to do it because I would have just felt like I would have panicked and been like, this isn't right. My legs hurt. Like, I think something's wrong. And I would get out, you know, and they'd say like, you know, I'm the one that sits there with people now. And I like push their shoulders down, stay, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
In like 90 seconds, you'll be fine. You know?
Yeah, no, that is a good one. I'm actually booked on a Wim Hof course in September, so I'm looking forward to that. Doing a bit of preparation now with cold showers and cold baths, but probably won't be the same as what I'm going to go through on the course, but we'll see.
Are you going somewhere to do that?
Yeah. There's a place near here where they're holding it. So I live in the countryside. So I'm looking
Where
forward.
Specifically?
I live in the West Country in England, Somerset. So
okay.
it's quite rural, and but yeah, I'm really looking forward to doing that. One thing I did want to ask you about, Mike, was obviously you've had a long time to perfect the way you prepare for tournaments, be it online tournaments, be it live tournaments. I'd like you to just give me some thoughts around that. What do you do? What have you observed that works? Maybe what have you observed that hasn't worked?
The biggest key to preparation for me is eliminating distractions. Like I had to, you know, I have vivid memories of having Facebook Messenger opening and clicking and misclicking all in at a final table, you know, with 7-4. Like, and just, I'm like, well, that's not very professional. Like, that's not an acceptable thing to do. And so, you know, when I was struggling with staying focused, I would just have no distractions. I would actually, I had a Chrome widget thing that I installed where it was like, during these hours, I can't even go on the internet. It's like, don't worry about SharkScope. You just can't go on the internet, man. You know, you just need to sit here and play and be present. So having everything taken care of, like, it sounds silly, but like making sure my bills are paid, you know, making sure like the cats are fed or the kids are fed, or, you know, there's no responsibilities that I have around the house, or, you know, whatever it may be. Taking care of those things beforehand allows me to be more present.
Absolutely. I mean, let's just imagine, you know, somebody who's listening has got a final table. You know, it may be an online final table, it may be a live final table, maybe the biggest event of their life.
Sure.
What would you, if you were to give them something to take away to prepare, what would you say? What would be maybe a technical key without knowing their game, maybe a mental game key? What would you emphasize to somebody in that situation?
when you're in a situation where you're playing for like life-changing money or whatever it is, these situations tend to not give you a lot of prep time. So when you find yourself in a situation where you're playing for a lot of money, whether it's online or live, sometimes live you have, maybe it's a 1-day tournament, maybe it's a 3-day tournament. Regardless, there's really not a lot of time for you to be studying. So I would kind of dismiss the idea that you can tactically prepare and focus on mentally preparing for all possible outcomes for that tournament. So instead of trying to study ICM and study spots and study stacks, it's too much info. You already have all the experience that you're going to have. You can't have more. You only have as much as you have. That's your experience, that's your intuition, and that's your wisdom when you sit down and play. And that's all you can use when you're playing your tournament. So I would urge people to stop like over preparing for short-term final tables. If you have a week, a month, a year off to study, sure. But if you don't have any time, don't worry about tactically preparing. Literally focus on how you can mentally prepare yourself to play that day. Prepare yourself to go from 1 out of 9 to 9 out of 9, back to 1 out of 9, what that takes, what it feels like to go from 9 of 9 to 1 of 9 and then back to 9 of 9 and then back to 1 of 9. Like, these are things that just happen. It doesn't always work out the way you want. So be prepared for all possible outcomes and kind of be at peace and tap into whatever your intuition is. Be hyper aware of it, tap into it, listen to it, because it's all you have.
I agree with that. 100%. And, again, an analogy I draw, I don't know whether you ever remember kids at school who before the exams had their books, just before they were about to go in the exams, they were looking at their books intently. It never went well for those guys. You've got to, you've just got to trust the knowledge you've got. You've got to, when I've got clients going into a series, I always say to them, just dance with the one you came with. You've got to just trust the game you've already got. Don't try and do a load of work within the series. Just recover. Remind yourself of the things that you are good at, and just as you say, just trust yourself. And actually, I think you'll go further from playing well if you don't trust yourself and try and do something hugely different or new, unless that happens to be what your instinct tells you in that moment.
No, I'm so glad you said that. Like, that's the other, I feel like that's maybe the other 50% is like, when you're in those spots, that it is absolutely not the time for creativity. It is the time for you to go with spots that and reads that you're comfortable and familiar with. And that's what I'm talking about, listening to your intuition. If you try to get too creative, that's where you're going to end up out here on some game tree that you don't know what the answer is, and it probably doesn't exist, really. Focus on what you know and like let that be your guiding light for your final table or your session or whatever it may be. Like, I've had I prepared someone for a WPT final table. He played cash games and then he made a deep run. He's a cash game player, and he made a deep run in WPT, and it was right before COVID. And they ended up postponing it, and they ended up playing it out like it was supposed to be like 2 months. So I wrote out a whole preparation plan of what we could go over the 2 months, what we could do. And it ended up getting postponed, and it was like a year. So we just worked together for a full year. And then I got to watch him play the final table because it was streamed or whatever. And I was just like, I was so proud. He took a 4-bet shove spot that he wouldn't have otherwise taken. He was seeing things very clearly. Ultimately, he didn't have enough hands, and he went in 6 of 6, but he ended up getting 4th. So he laddered twice. And he had he had Brian Altman at the final table. He had some other, it was just a bunch of like really aggressive, really good players. And that was a very unique situation where he had a lot of time to prepare. But generally, there's no time, like this summer, my friend, final table, the 3K, the mid stakes tournament, I went deep with him. So I ended up busting like 77th or 75th or something. And he ended up bagging day 3 and making day 4, which had about 16 or 17 people left. And I met with him that morning, and, having been in these situations a lot, and I've talked a lot of poker with him, he plays mixed games, but he's had some really good no limit hold'em scores. And I was just like, look, what do you want from me? Like, obviously we're not going to discuss much strategy because there's so many iterations of how it plays from 17 down. Like, it's really, we can discuss some general stuff if you want, but I just kind of put the ball in his court. And I'm like, do you want any help from me? If so, how can I help you? So it was like a little bit of a different approach with someone that's, experienced, been in big spots, but, he had a bunch of debt with his backer, but he also had some of himself, and he ended up doing really well in the tournament for a huge score, clearing all of his debt, making a bunch of money. And I wanted to make sure I didn't overstep or get in his head too much, because whatever he was doing got him to 17 left. And he was like 2 of 17 or 1 of, whatever it was. Who am I to like get in here and say, you should have done this or that? If he asks me about a spot, I'll tell him what I would have done. That doesn't mean that it's right. It's just like, yeah, this is what I would have done in that spot. And he's like, okay. And it ended up being similar to what he was doing. So my job is basically to make him feel confident. And I don't think that I can overstate how important confidence is in tournaments. I also can't quantify it, but I can tell you that if someone has a 5% ROI or a 3% ROI and someone has 10 or 15%, like, I want the guy that's confident that has the 5% ROI. And I can't tell you why. Like, it doesn't make any sense, but I just feel like over the span of my career and seeing this, like, I see people that have no idea what's happening and they're so confident. It messes with my head, Yeah. But I'd rather see the confidence. Maybe you have some insight to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what we do know is the person who's going to be confident is going to pull the trigger on what they know. They're going to do it. They're not going to talk themselves out of it in a key moment. And that is an important skill. Otherwise, you're not translating what you know technically onto the game field. You're simply leaving it behind. And that is something, we have to work out with clients. If you're working as a mental game coach, you have to work with that. But it has to come, of course, from technical foundations. You can't give it to somebody who hasn't put in the hours in actually making their game fundamentally sound. But equally, you can have people who've made their game fundamentally sound, but they haven't got the confidence. And then when push comes to shove, they don't actually do what they know they should do when the lights come on. And that, that is a big leak.
That can be fixed by you.
It can be fixed.
That's where you come in. Yeah. And that's why mental game, I think, is so important, is like recognize, like taking accountability, recognizing you didn't pull the trigger you should have in 3 spots. 3 spots, you should have done it. And you didn't do it all 3 times. Why?
Yeah.
What was it? Could you have prepared better? Was it, whatever, digging into that, like viscerally putting yourself back in that moment, understanding what you were thinking, what you were feeling, and where the like mental game leak is, or where the leak is in your game. And if you can't do that, you can't succeed in the game. Like, you have to have a certain amount of humility. Otherwise you can't grow.
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things you can do when you're reviewing your sessions, it's one thing saying, oh, I don't know how to play that spot. Let's go away and study that. That's important. That's technical work. That's the area for you, your poker tools, and your technical coach, if you've got one. But if you're saying, oh, there's that spot again, I knew what I should do, but I didn't do it. That's where your mental game coach comes in. Because what's usually happening there is a pattern of self-sabotage going on. Something is stopping you from executing what you know. And that is where the approach, I use, particularly with hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy is specifically directed towards the subconscious. You know what you should be doing, but you're hijacked in the moment by your emotions, which is effectively a subconscious program. You can't even articulate why you did it. I mean, you may have some ideas, but that's where the work of a mental game coach really comes in, and you can really make a difference, because it's all very well and good having an A game, which works perfectly in theory when you're reviewing the hands with somebody else and saying, yes, of course you should do this and not that. But if you can't do it, and if that becomes a pattern, that's really important to observe that and do something about it. Otherwise, you won't be able to change it. And, that's something where you can actually, for example, one of the things I do with clients is I produce an MP3 for them. I'll do it in a session, but I'll also produce an MP3 of them visualizing a particular spot. And maybe it's a spot which they find stressful. And we will actually get them to talk through mentally their own heuristic as to how they are going to solve that spot, what thought process they want in that moment, as opposed to what's happening.
Yeah.
Which often for a client in that situation is, I'm just going to hit this button. I'm just going to hit this button. And I don't even know why, but I'm going to hit it. It may be call, it may be all in, whatever it is. But instead, so effectively what happens is their fight, flight, or freeze mechanism just takes over in that moment and just says, I'm going to make the decision for you, rather than thinking through whatever it is you want to think through, ranges, equity, whatever your own desired thought process is there. You can train it, not just consciously, but subconsciously. So that's exactly what I would do there. You're right. Confidence can be trained. Confidence in individual spots and confidence across the piece is also a trainable skill. As I say, it's not magic. Somebody who just never studies poker, I can't give them confidence because their brain is going to recognize the bullshit when they're playing on the final table, and one of these wizards is putting them in a difficult spot, and they've never thought about it. But if they have thought about it, then it definitely is something where we can say, hey, we can train the brain to say, hey, you've got this, you can do it. And it doesn't matter who it is, you can do it. It does come back to this idea we discussed before of effectively just trusting yourself. We have to build enough knowledge to have that trust, but it doesn't have to be perfect. This is the thing.
Yeah.
You don't have to have solved every spot perfectly, to be able to compete. And
that's the beautiful thing about the game. It
is. So it's definitely something but you can definitely talk yourself out of competing. That's the challenge. And I really like your approach, by the way, in terms of helping your friend, which is just to effectively reinforce his belief in his own game, which was clearly well-founded.
I didn't know that's what I was doing. I just know that inundating or overwhelming someone with information is counterproductive. So let's not do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just came at it of a place of like, let's keep things really simple. We can't prepare tactically for this. So,
Yeah.
well, you have any hand history questions I can answer? Like that kind of thing. It's just very passive. I was watching, I saw a video on my feed today on YouTube that I thought was really interesting. It was how to give kids confidence. I don't think I was given this too much growing up. Not a why me story. It's just I had to kind of develop confidence through trial and error and through life. And one of the ways that the lady says to do it, or the main way she says to do it, is I believe, like when a kid says, they don't want to go do something because of XYZ, she says the proper response is, I believe you. I believe that you don't want to do XYZ because of whatever. And in this family, we highly value following through. And so instead of saying but, she says and.
Yeah.
Subtle things. And there was a Huberman interview with some psychologist. I don't know who she was, but I just like it really caught my eye that like there's a confidence thing that can be instilled in kids. And I think that I've seen adults where they got that, and I've seen adults where they don't have it, like me not having had that growing up, and then seeing people navigate the world with a confidence that is almost like astonishing to me. I guess I'm just drawn to it in general, but in poker, I think it's like super, super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You touched on your relationship with Alex Fitzgerald and also Brian Paris. And also I think it's relevant to the discussion we've just had about being able to have clear thoughts in pressure moments. And you've released a couple of courses with Brian Paris. You've released a fundamentals MTT course, and then there's also the next level up, as it were. Like it's like a mid-stakes plus course. And I can say from experience, having consumed your courses, that you're very good at providing those heuristics which enable people to see things clearly under pressure. Just talk to me a little bit about the courses and the way you teach poker.
Okay. Well, we'll start with the courses. With Alex, I basically have two courses. One is a Sunday Million win. We actually have more than that, but the main ones are the Sunday Million win and a back-to-back turbo win for the Hot 55 on Stars. I don't even know if I'm not even on Stars lately. I don't know if there is a Hot 55 anymore. But I got through those fields of 500 to 700 people on back-to-back nights. So we just go through what it takes to get to all the chips, from starting stack to all the chips, all the things in between. And in the turbo course, we go through a lot of ICMizer work. In the Sunday Million course, there's more post flop, there's Flopzilla, there's combinatorics. It's a bit of a different approach. It's for like all big fields. So we have those two courses with Alex, and then I have two courses with Brian that I am also very excited about. The first one is Tournament Fundamentals, which I think if you don't know how to define that, then you probably need the course. But it's like the questions that we've gotten asked over and over and over and over. And we're like, look, let's just put a course together so we don't have to answer these questions anymore. And people can have a synthesized version of what fundamentals are, instead of having to, get coaching from us for 10 hours. We can just give it for, a couple $100 for 10 hours. So it kind of expedites the process for people and for us. And then we have the Mid-Stakes Mastery course, which is just, it's such insane value, honestly. I wish I had access to this stuff when I was first starting. It's over 40 hours of content. We have audios in there of me and Brian talking about live wins, about mystery bounty strategy, PKO strategy. We have 2 hand histories of wins of Brian's from PKO wins, and then we have he won he chopped the global millions for first, and we have that full hand history on there. That's 22,000 runners in that tournament. And then we have some play and explain section. We have live coaching sessions where him and I worked with a kid that who is now better than both of us, or close to it at least, which is a beautiful thing to watch. We have live coaching sessions with Brian and him, and then me and him. Database review. There's just so much stuff. It's like I haven't even thought about it for a while. But yeah, I mean, lots of content. That's 40 hours, over 40 hours of content, just for that mid-stakes mastery course.
And we'll put some links in the show notes. And I think you've discounted the normal price for those courses. So everybody, if you just go on the show notes, you'll be able to access that. But I think there's a limited number of discounts. So act quickly when you hear or see this podcast. I just want to finish up, Mike, by just talking about the future, really. What's your vision? How do you see yourself going forward? What are your goals? How do you see life shaping up from here?
Yeah, I like this question. Once I got this win at Commerce, it was like my first. I've won like dailies and stuff, small ones that aren't on Hendon Mob, but I hadn't had that big live win. I mean, I got second. I guess I've had some live scores. Like I got second at a Venetian like right before COVID. But winning this 1200 for like 200 buy-ins was such a cool experience of not chopping, going through, negotiating heads up, declining it, and saying, let's play it out. And then I reduced some of the variance with my backer because my opponent was just going to go all in for 50 big blinds effective at a high frequency. He didn't say that, but I knew that was just one of the things that he did in his game. It was a good spot to be in. But I was going to effectively have to run like a 60-40 or 70-30 for, the full heads up amount. And so I just mitigated a little bit of risk and then went in there and played it out and won it. And the experience of, I prepared for that final table the morning of with Dan, and we walked through the final table. We walked through what my insecurities were, all these things, and prepared me mentally and emotionally for that final table. There was no tactical preparation. It was just pure, how are you feeling? How do you want to be feeling? Let's get you there. And the final table played out exactly how I visualized it, which is unbelievable to experience because it really makes you believe in this woo-woo shit that you do. I mean, I'm a very skeptical person, very, very skeptical, but it's hard to deny it when it's just right in your face, So it was a wonderful experience. And my belief in winning live tournaments has just exponentially increased. So that's a long way to answer your question of, I think I'm ready to have a gold one of these,
Yeah.
Even if it's diminished, the value of it's diminished over time. I like the idea of it. The money is obviously better than the bracelet, but the bracelet has just moved up a notch in importance to me because it's a visual representation of the blood, sweat, and tears that I've fought through to get where I am. And I didn't value that before. And I think I've gotten to a place where I'm actually ready for it. I'm ready to not self-sabotage. I'm ready to not go all in when I know call is the right play. I'm ready to, be mindful and come at this from a very, like I said, level perspective. I was trying to think of the equanimity, like coming at it from an equanimous or whatever the word is, whatever the conjugation is.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. That's a great spot to finish on, and wish you all the best. Let's keep an eye on you going forwards in the hunt for that bracelet, which I think is richly deserved, given not just the career you've had, but in terms of what you've given to us as consumers, as I am, of your content, which is really incredibly educational. Thank you again.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind words. Thank you so much for having me.
So many thanks to Mike for his time and thoughts. And thank you all for listening to the Mindset Advantage. So until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast. To get future episodes delivered to you automatically, make sure to subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcasting service. To get any resources mentioned in the episode or to listen to past shows, visit pokermindcoach.com/TMA podcast. Thanks for listening.